probably most of you in the call. My name is Chris Carron. I am the Vice President of the Scottish branch of HPMA. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar. And our topic for the day is banter, behaviour and consequences. And as HR practitioners, we all know that kind of banter is described as almost something that's benign and team building, but we know that once a culture is established within a team, it's very difficult to change it, and it can foster behaviours which, whether intentionally or unintentionally, can create some negative consequences and some potential problems down the line, which is often the point that we as HR practitioners get involved in the situation. Today's speaker is Jerry Kavanagh. Jerry works as an organisational development consultant in NHS Lothian in the east of Scotland. But Jerry's worked in the NHS for over 40 years in a variety of clinical and non-clinical settings. So he has some rich experience in terms of team behaviours and has developed an interest in that across his career. And has developed this approach to looking at banter behaviour and consequences, which he's going to share with us today. Jerry will talk for around about 40-45 minutes, during which you can pose any questions you want in the chat function within Zoom, and I'll take a note of that and pose questions initially at the end of Jerry's presentation, or either. Well, we should have around about 15 minutes at the end for anybody that wants to ask any questions specifically. Just to outline some sort of Zoom etiquette, as it were. The Zoom webinar is being recorded, so just be aware of that. If you can stay on mute during Jerry's presentation, we'd appreciate it. And we'll give you the opportunity to unmute and ask questions at the end of that. So without further ado, I will pass you on to Jerry, and hopefully he'll share his screen and some slides and some introductory thoughts, and I'll speak to you at the end of the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and hopefully everybody can hear me. And I can just see somebody I've not seen for a long time. I think it's Linda Davidson that's in the room. So nice to see you again, Linda. It's been a while. Yeah, that's a really good introduction, Chris, because the real important message about what I'm going to share with you is this is not a training course from HR telling naughty teenagers what they're allowed to say and not allowed to say at work anymore. It's really, really important that what you do with this stuff.
Yeah, I've booked online for a Pilates class this evening at Adwick, but I've just had my booster and my arm's killing me. I've tried rearranging it, but it's not letting me online. Is there any way I can do that?
You're not on mute.
Yeah.
Chris myself. Dear God.
Well, if I can just book on for a different week or something. I've already.
That's interesting.
Okay, well, I think we might have worked out that Hayley might have worked out that she wasn't on mute there. Right, Jerry, sorry, false start.
Here we go again. Right, yeah, we're talking about teenage behaviours and the assumption that this might sound like controlling parents telling the workforce what they're not allowed to do or say anymore. It's really important that what you do with this stuff is you contextualise it to the audience that's going to be there, or you provide maybe a one-to-one with a team lead to say, look, this might be useful to share, and have it more of a conversation around some of the stuff that I'm talking about here. Because yeah, absolutely, Chris, none of this is new to HR professionals. You'll see it every day. You'll see the consequences of it every day. And I think it's just about how can we package something that helps people to think a wee bit different. And the reason this came about was I'm one of a group of mediators that we have in NHS Lothian. So NHS Lothian started up a mediation service about 5 years ago. And I got a case referral through from this supervisor, a bunch of drivers in NHS Lane. And it was a real, 3 people had just really fallen out about a behaviour. But what had happened was, it was somebody, because of COVID, their job, had come to an end, they'd been laid off, and it was a big finance company, and he was desperate for work, and he grabbed this job in NHS Lothian as a driver. In day one, he was absolutely appalled by what he heard. He went straight to the supervisor and said, "This is not acceptable. I'm taking out a formal complaint against these 2 individuals." So what we try to encourage supervisors and managers to do is, well, have you thought about mediation first, before you go straight for the formal process? And that helps in a lot of ways to improve relationships. So they agreed, and then I spoke with them about what mediation actually was, how it would work, and they kind of got a bit nervous, and they thought, "Oh, right, okay, maybe could we apologise to the guy?" And actually they did, and they had a conversation, which was really useful. And their bottom line was, they didn't think they were doing anything wrong. And it was because, that saying, we use this saying a lot in NHS Lothian, is what you permit, you promote. Okay, so these guys have been so used to this banter, just a bit of banter. How often have you heard that? But the new person was really offended, and they realised what that was. So the supervisor said, "Would you come and talk to the guys in a collective way, maybe about 20 of them, have a session around about, do you realise what happens if you go this route? You could possibly lose your job." And subsequently, we've had 2 or 3 cases where there's been people displaced for 10 months while the investigation was on, and it was all about what people have been saying. So I thought, well, what about doing a quick session around about banter, behaviours and the consequences? I'll call it BBC. Right, so people know it as BBC, and it's the word in the street, or this session called BBC. We're going to have to stop doing that before we get corporate lawyer teams banging from above about what we're calling this programme. So I've had to put BBC in it just to make sure that that's probably less. As you'll see, I've been pretty crafty about how I've structured the wording here, but that's maybe something I'll need to think about. So what I'll do is I'll just share the slides, and just imagine you're either as a person who's new to the organisation, what's the rules here for NHS Lothian, or is it a new team that's come together and say, well, what do you think we should be like with this stuff? I don't know. It's for me, the delivery of this is going to be really, really important, and it can't be a training course to tell people what not to say anymore. It needs to be more owned by the people to say, well, yeah, I can see why that's, God, I never realised that. That's really, yeah, that's opened my eyes. So the one nugget of feedback I got from the supervisor after I did that session was, there was one guy, and I remember seeing his face because it was a face-to-face session. He was a real character. And he said to the boss afterwards, "Aye, that's pretty good, that, it'll make me think twice before I open my gub." So for me, that's a result, because that guy may just know where the barriers are and the boundaries are before he decides to say what he thinks is a great joke. So let's crack on with the actual slides itself. So going into Oxford English Dictionary, what is actually banter? They describe it as a playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks. It's been around, it's been documented since about the 1600s that people started recognising this as a part of human behaviour that we all recognise. It's quite, having done a bit of research, usual places like YouTube and Google and all that sort of stuff, this legal team had a really good extension to that, and I thought that was really useful. And it should actually be between consenting people of equal status and position. And I think that makes it a bit clearer about what we're talking about here, because it's got lots of different connotations. When you think about genuine and fun banter, so as Chris said, I've been in the NHS now for 40 odd years. Now, the stuff that I first saw and heard as I was about 17 and a half year old, and I was listening to men, probably my dad's age, my mum's age, talking really basic, brutal stuff that I found. I wasn't a shrinking violet, but I thought, my God, imagine that was my mum and dad. Did they speak like that? And as a really young guy, I was quite shocked about the behaviours that I saw, the language that I heard. I didn't really, because I'd never ever heard my dad swear much. And this was me suddenly hearing all this stuff. And I thought, whoa, this is a bit weird. So maybe there's something we need to think about in terms of young people coming into the organisation, about how maybe we need to really think about this, because a lot of younger people, as you'll find later on in the presentation, are getting a lot about bullying and banter and how it's important to tell the difference. But it's, when Jenny McCuskey asked me to do this in Lothian First to share with HR colleagues, it was about, well, actually, it's important to have fun at work. And great to have a good laugh at work. You go home and, oh, what a great laugh I had today. And it was at nobody's expense. It was genuine, it was at fun, and it was enjoyable. And that is great at work. And we should encourage that. And it would be good to be able to have fun and people know where the boundaries are, so that we can have, particularly in these current times, maybe a bit of laugh at work, because it's important. And happy teams are safer teams, and there's tons of evidence that backs that up. So you do get, on the London context, you get the genuine, nice laugh that is banter, and that's great, but not always there, because sometimes people just don't realise who the boundaries are. Just out of ignorance, they say something like, oh, Jerry, blah, blah, blah. And it comes back to them, bites back at them, and they say, oh God, Jerry, I am so sorry. I really never realised about that, about your dad was in that situation, or this at home, or your personal life, or whatever. I'm really, really sorry. Now, if that's all that happens, then that's good, because that person suddenly becomes aware and genuinely sorry about what they've said and done. The difficulty is, when it happens again, what do you do? Have they just forgotten, or have they just started to move into the next phase, which is deliberate and nasty? They know that this is hurtful. They know that this is a barb that this person's got, and actually they start to take it on and take advantage of that individual. So it's difficult to see where the three lie, because sometimes people can be very crafty about how they behave, and they know the system and how much to press and what buttons not to press. So again, it's sometimes quite difficult to describe it and to show it and to see it, but most of us have a gut feeling that is pretty well tuned into it. So what a few myths then we're going to have to think about the bottom line here. What are we talking about here? What is it? People might say, well, is this just PC gone mad, the bloody PC brigade, and you know what, you tell us what we can and can't say anymore. This is, nobody wants to work in a sterile working environment. Is that what you're saying? Well, actually, no, that's not what we're saying. We're encouraging people to have fun at work. In fact, NHS Lothian has embraced, I don't know if you've heard about the Joy in Work campaign. It's quite an interesting concept. It goes kind of like for those of you who did fish years ago, the fish philosophy, it kind of ties in with that important message that actually you choose your behaviours at work. You can decide what kind of day you want to have. So, does it mean we can't have a laugh and a joke anymore? No, it means we are actually making sure if you do have a joke and a laugh, you know where the boundaries are. So it's a grey area. I mean, you guys, HR professionals, you probably thought, God, how do we deal with banter? Do we just put it into the policies that, we just don't do it? Or do we just take that line? Well, it doesn't really work if you do that, because people will just do it. And that's the bottom line. Even at this level, 2050, I know there are any football fans in here. I'm not a football fan, but it's interesting that even at this level, they're paid so much money. September here, the football season had started, and they were going down the tubes. At Chelsea were going down the tubes. The manager says you're not allowed to have banter anymore at work. Even in the training grounds, interpersonal banter on the pitch, stuff in the media and text, banned it all. Made absolutely no difference. The team didn't perform very well at all. In fact, 3 or 4 months later, Jose Mourinho was off on another managerial journey to another club. I think it was, I can't remember where he went after that. So you can't ban it. It will happen. You can try and ban it, but it probably won't. It just would help if people knew who the boundaries are, I think, before they started taking that route. So let's go back to the beginning then about the definitions about what we're talking about here, this playful and friendly exchange of teasing remarks. Is it playful and friendly? to be really honest, you will know if it's not. You know, sometimes it can be, you know, who's going to have the courage, say to me, 17 or 18-year-old, start saying to somebody my dad's age, actually, can you stop doing that? I don't like it. Is it consenting? You know, we hear it time and time again, and I might be younger, I might be older, I might be the one that's different, I don't know. Am I really consenting to this? Because what happens is it's, oh yeah, that's funny, yeah, it's a good laugh, yeah. But deep down inside you're thinking, we should stop. Or you become so used to it that it becomes, you know, like water off a duck's back. You don't feel it. But other people might see it, and they might start getting impacted. And that's something we need to think about as well in this context. And there is that status thing. What is it about the status? So if, say, for example, the boss is the one who leads on the jokes in the banter, who's going to say something? It could be, and I've had personal experience of this, whereas we had a boss when I worked in used to work in operating theatres in the early days, and our boss was pretty hopeless, to be bottom line. He was inconsistent, he had favouritism, people manipulated him, he was an unhealthy, unhappy man, miserable, and was stressed by all the stuff he was getting on a daily basis at work. So he was getting bullied from the so-called banter below. So status and position in the organisation can have an awful impact. So when you think about it, you can see how hard to have good banter actually is, because sometimes it's particularly masked. So let's think about that really fine line between banter and bullying. There's 2 or 3 things that might be useful, even just single slides, to have a conversation with a team to see what you might want to think about. Actually, do you know the difference? So I took this from stuff that's going on in high schools across the country, and it's called from the Anti-Bullying Alliance. And they're saying, well, when is actually banter actually bullying? Have a conversation about what this could actually be like. So let's go back to what is, we're saying that banter is teasing and joking, it's fun and friendly and it's okay. That's the kind of definition we could work with. Thinking about bullying as a repeated behaviour that's physical and emotional harm, whether it's intended or not. And that's the key thing here. Because a lot of bullies and a lot of people that banter, you know, oh, it was just a bit of banter, we were only having a laugh. I didn't mean to hurt the person. And that's often the defence. And that's no longer acceptable in my opinion, because people now have the tools, should have the tools after this to do something about it. So, thinking about, again, the Bullying Alliance, there's slides that they pick up. I think they're quite good. And I think they've got these up in high schools and the workplace across the country. And they're actually quite good. And you think about, absolutely friendly banter is fun, but when does it start getting a wee bit out of hand? So think about what you're going to say. Would you like it to be said to your son, your daughter, your partner, your wife, husband, grandparents, or you? Think about it. Is that the sort of comment you'd make to your partner or your mum? That's probably not the case. Is somebody picking on somebody's insecurities? You know, they're not confident about speaking up, or they're not confident with their job, or they're just come in and they're not quite sure how to do it, and people just lump on it and attack it. That's kind of low, and that's not healthy. Are they really enjoying it? If they're not, stop. You can see it if they're not laughing. People are not laughing along either. And again, we'll talk about the people in the audience. It's also quite interesting about how they behave, and we'll talk about that later on. But what's interesting is that when banter is kind of barbed and not particularly nice, there is always an audience. It's rarely at one-to-one. So that says something to me as well. And of course, using the excuse, oh, it's just a bit of banter. doesn't mean to say it's okay. You know, there is a line, and now you know what that line is. So I suppose what we're doing is we're saying to people, well, here's where the line is, and we're not crossing that. And of course, if you can get a collective, like a team or a group of people to agree on what we find acceptable, not acceptable, then that would be really useful. So in NHS Lothian, like most organisations, we have our NHS Lothian values, NHS Scotland values. But as a health board, we've said, well, here's what teamwork and dignity, respect, that's the kind of stuff that we accept is okay, and what we say is not okay. And as an OD consultant, we often go into teams and say, well, that's the kind of global values for the organisation, but what do you want to put in for your department, your team? You might want to extend, you know, put another column about actually in our ENT service, here's what we want to set out. And it could be that, you know, there's certain barriers or boundaries about banter that you might want to put in there or something like that. So that's kind of like a national programme. It's trying to address some of the real issues that are in high schools, and obviously that fits into our workplace as well. It's the same stuff, it's the same human behaviour that are getting in the way. So again, this slide could be useful just to start a conversation. Do you find that there's only one person in the joke? You know, it's the same poor Jerry that's getting the same joke time and time again. Well, actually, that's not really banter. Nope, I'm sorry. What about, is it embarrassing, insulting, or shaming stuff? Yeah, we're not into banter there. Is it about one of the protected characteristics? It's never going to have a good outcome, particularly in an ER/HR context. That's when it starts straying into legislation. Not a good idea. Again, we'll show you the protected characteristics. Some people don't know what they are. Unwanted sexual comment advance in banter. Does the person say, or do they look like they don't like it? Again, we're straying way out of banter. And think about the audience. Think carefully before you speak. I mean, how often have we all come out with a great joke or seen something on the TV or made a snide comment about a politician or a situation that's happening in the world, and we state our case just for we think it's going to be a great laugh, and suddenly nobody laughs, everybody looks at their shoes and you wonder, oh God, have I said the wrong thing? Well, how could we help people not to say the wrong thing? So again, even this one slide could be useful. So have you started thinking about veiled comments about protected characteristics? You might think it's funny to mention that somebody's off on holiday for a particular holiday, or trying to make disguised comments funnily about the 12 characteristics. If that's what you're thinking about, it's never going to end well. So think about that joke or that comment you're going to make. If it's in that context, it's not going to turn out well for you, and you may actually lose your job. And I think a lot of people forget that this is the conversation that you could be having in a one-to-one with somebody in terms of their PDP, or you've got a difficult conversation with them. Here's the reality could be, this is the third time I've heard this happen, and if it continues, I'm worried that it may have an impact on your job. So what we have in NHS Lothian is one or two conversation sessions that I think that this links in very nicely to. So again, going back to our mediation service, the company that delivered that for us, a company called CMP Resolutions, they gave us the foundation of a thing called Courage to Manage Conversations. So in that session, which is around 4 hours online now, we give people the tools and the tips and the techniques to have the conversations they need to have. The conversations that pull out things like, I'm noticing, I'm wondering, stuff about bullying and harassment, or any unwanted particular behaviour, and try to address it with a conversation as a manager or as an individual in a team. So for me, there's a really close link between being aware of the BBBC stuff, the stuff that you know now, what is not acceptable, then doing your courage to manage conversations session, which is around about the tools and tips about actually what to say next. And then what we're developing is a session for next year, which is about called supported conversation, which allows a supervisor or a team lead or a manager at whatever level to notice behaviours that are going on between two people and almost in the moment deal with that and have a supported conversation to help John and Peter talk about that, just that blow up in the coffee room at lunchtime, in the moment, there and then, that day. So that's because in NHS Scotland, the Once for Scotland policy is creeping now into the boards, where we're all talking about early interventions is really important. So having an awareness about what is bullying, what is banter, and what are the consequences, then being able to have the conversation afterwards. And then if things don't go well, you've got the courage and confidence as a supervisor or a colleague to say, how about us three have a conversation about this and be able to hold this space. So that's where we put this into a context over the next year that hopefully people will be able to say something more as opposed to just hoping it goes away. Or putting loads onto the HR teams to say, oh, we've got bullying in my team, come and fix it or deal with this grievance. So again, I think it could be a win-win if we take this approach across the organisations. So again, let's think about this audience before you jump in with your smart comments. There is stuff about compliments that are often really veiled as a bit creepy. You know, going back to my experience as an 18-year-old, some of the compliments I was getting from some of the women, because it was predominantly women I was working with, they had comments about what I was wearing and how it looked okay. I found that a bit creepy, and it goes both ways. Do you really want to make a compliment to that person's dress or that hairstyle? Good thing. And this is where it strays into that difficulty between friendly at work and friends. So if you have a very close friend, you may talk about, oh, you'll never guess what happened to me last night, you know, about personal stories. But actually at work, you can say, well, you know, I don't want to hear the gory details of your love life. I'm happy to be sort of friendly at work, but you're kind of crossing the line here with being a bit sharing a bit too much information here, maybe, boy. So that's something you might want to think about and about managing the conversations. Nasty comments. Some of the really cutting remarks that you can make. Sometimes when you think about your very, very close friends, you might get away with something like that, but not at work. Not the nastiness that's, okay, it's not in the characteristics, but it might be something that you constantly go at time and time again. And I've seen this manifest at work in an operating department, 2 consultants literally fighting in the changing room, in their underpants, and I'm standing in the middle. I suppose it was my early interventions at that point, when I was about 20-year-old watching 2 grown men just about knocking lumps at each other because of repeated nasty comments that they had, that everybody heard and nobody did anything about. So is that what's happening? Do you want to really take that route? Because it's not going to be helpful. And thinking about the other person, are they more junior in this situation? They're not likely to step up and say, or are they a minority? So again, going back to my experience, a lot of places I work, NHS loading is 76% female. So on many of the places I worked, I was the only bloke, and I would be the butt of a lot of banter. That I felt uncomfortable, but just didn't want to rock the boat. A colleague who was the only Scottish individual in this team, and he, big bloke, you'd think he could handle himself, he got really upset by the constant bickering and bantering about his Scottishness, and he was the only one there, and it was a real problem for this guy, to the point he left. So team culture is the same joke over and over again. That can become overbearing, and it becomes just this is how we do here. Going back to these guys I talked about in the original conversation, you know, that became the way they were. And what's often interesting is people just become blind to it. And it's almost like white noise. They don't hear it, they don't sense it. It's not until somebody says, I'm fed up with this, that anything's done. And it might be your role. Being more senior means that everybody thinks it's okay if you engage in this. You think, hey, I'll be fine. It's I want to be one of the lads. Sometimes people move into roles, have come through the ranks, and they want to be seen to be just one of the guys, so that people like them and do what they're told, but actually it becomes counterproductive. They are actually leading by example, so the example filters down the line. And that goes at all levels. Because when I first broached this concept of banter, okay, my early experiences it was in the kind of lower bands in the NHS, but actually people were saying to me, Jerry, this happens in the boardroom. I've been there, I've seen it, and I've sensed it. So it happens at all levels, clinical and non-clinical. And finally, you might want to think about that hilarious email, and you've got the social media and the other branch of this that we've even touched on, which is the cyberbullying and the stuff that's happening on WhatsApps and all that kind of stuff. So that is something that people don't often understand, is that never goes away. And the angry email or the email to all about what you saw at work today and all that, and what John said or Peter said or Amy said, people sometimes don't realise the implications and the consequences of that. It never goes away. What's a wee bit scary for me is that a lot of people are using WhatsApp in the NHS, and I don't think that's healthy or right. Given we've got Teams now, and there's worries about how WhatsApp now is you can set it so that the message disappears after, I don't know, I never use it, and I don't use any other social media, but apparently the message can disappear. So you could be some kind of bullying comments going in, and they feel comfortable knowing that nobody's going to have a trail of that because it evaporates. So that's what I think might get people having a conversation. And what I would then say, well, or before or after, say, look, here are the 12 protected characteristics. So these are enshrined in law, and anything around about that is, you know, jokes about age and disability can have an impact on the organisation as well as the individual. And, you know, I don't want to go into case law, but you could, if you were doing it to HR colleagues, you could bring in incidents where there's law where, you know, people have been engaged in the banter that is very nasty, and they've put in claims for unfair dismissal and stuff like that. And actually, after the investigation, it was found that actually they were complicit in it and equally brutal, and there wasn't a case. But as far as they're concerned, it's the claimant's point of view that matters. So one case was in John Lewis in Edinburgh, where two people were having real anti-religious banter about two football teams, and this individual was in that, you know, listening in earshot of that, and was really upset about it, complained about it, and the two individuals were sacked that same day. So there's stuff going on that is quite difficult to deal with, but, you know, some people don't realise the consequences. And a good example of how these consequences manifest is looked at by a national programme that's running just now. So in your organisation, you can invite this team in, and they've got this thing called Be an Active Bystander. And it's a national campaign. I think they do train. They've come to Lothian, and we've had it, and it's been very successful. And I'm just going to share with you some of the messages from that links so neatly into what are the consequences of this banter and the bullying and that stuff, and how do we deal with it? And what they've noticed that when people see bad behaviours or stuff that's inappropriate, what do people do? Actually, the majority of witnesses do nothing. Why is that? We've all done it. We've all stood there, have looked at our shoes and, oh God, here we go again. That's Jerry often who's getting it today, or yeah, that's poor guy's getting at it again. Some people laugh at it, some people feel embarrassed. It'll be all kind of bystand, and we watch this go on and we don't say anything. And the reasons they give is some people say, well, I'm not got the time, it's, I have to do, I don't have to worry about this, it's no problem, it's not my business, I'm really not interested. Some people say, well, it was my boss and I didn't know who to talk to. And some people even say, well, it's not serious, I was there myself, I was a new boy once and I had to deal with it, you just get over it, it becomes one of these things. But then a lot of people say I'm scared of the outcome. And what they describe is really interesting, because if you think of the zebra at the back, they know fine there's a lion somewhere having a munch at the crowd, watching them having a munch, and they know one of them is going to get picked off. And what they show is a short film about a guy lying on the street in London, an actor who's calling for help me. And 62 people walked past him before somebody stopped and said, "Are you okay?" And what their argument is, and it's quite a well-established argument in human behaviour, is we tend to want to be part of the herd. Like these zebras over there, we're going to stay together and do what is the norm, as opposed to stepping out of line, because if you step out of line, like a young guy here on the left, you're going to get it. So all these people are walking past that man lying on the ground. We're actually wanting to be part of the herd. Being part of the person that walks past is the norm. The one that's going to be awkward, is difficult, is the one who's going to stop and say, "Are you okay?" Interestingly, they did the exact same in the finance sector. They put a man with a suit on and a tie and a briefcase, and it was minutes before somebody stopped him because he looked like them. It was interesting, that, wasn't it? So what we're saying is, if you choose to do something, put your hands up and say, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm not quite sure this is right." Sometimes just speaking up is enough. People are not aware of the impact of the words and actions. So going back to that panda way back in the beginning, actually, sometimes, I just didn't realise that was offensive. I'm so sorry. Hands up, never happen again. Yeah, and genuinely apologies. Sometimes that's all people need. Oh, right, I didn't realise that. Yeah, because there's a new boss who's come in and they've pointed out stuff that the whole team never realised. Almost like these guys I described at the beginning. It was that new person coming in who had the courage to say, "Oh, this is not acceptable." And that changed that whole. It could have been that he complied and became one of them and became the norm, the new norm for him. So what we offer is a tool for people to use that you might think is quite interesting. It was what we use in our Courage to Manage Conversations, and it's a tool that allows people to structure a wee bit of how you say what needs to be said. Okay, so when you take the mickey out of my blah, 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 I get really angry or I feel really upset, and I wonder if you could talk about this. So that's a really useful tool that you could use in your social life as well as your work life. When you come into meetings late every day, I feel angry. The impact is I've got to go around the table again to say to people, "So can you talk about being at meetings on time?" So when you take the mickey out of John, the new guy, about him going to church on a certain day of the week, I feel really angry and I feel really worried about what you're saying, because the impact is you may lose your job because it's straying into really dangerous territory. Do you know about the top protected characteristics? Well, suddenly they now have the awareness. Now, if they consistently do it, then you've got a pattern of behaviour that's unacceptable and evidence to say that person is bullying, and the consequences are, as you know, depending on the organisation. So just to finish up, just about some of the things that might look like, encouraging people to talk from the eye. See, look, I don't like racist jokes. They get me upset. Can you please not make them anymore? I've heard all these comments about my body before. Can you stop doing it? I really don't like it. Or even just say it. People don't say these things anymore, Jerry. You'll need to think twice about your behaviour. Another thing I think is useful, just to finish off, is a campaign across the NHS in Scotland about civility saves lives. And there's a really, really nice clip on YouTube that you can have a look at anytime you like. And some of the things about being civil at work, and just understanding the impact of your behaviour at work can make a difference. And this is a paediatric consultant, I think, from Edinburgh, who first produced this and made this campaign. And there's a short video that's been done by a trust in England. It's really just nice, says the message. And the messages are pretty clear. If somebody's rude at work, it reduces their quality work by 30%. Huge impact on, even by seeing stuff that's horrible, and it has a 50% less likely to help other people. So, don't need to read it out like karaoke, but that is the last slide I want to talk about. So, I've got to done the 44 minutes, Chris. I hope that's not too short for you. What I'll do now is stop sharing my screen and hand it back to you, Chris, about any questions or conversations we might want to have.
Okay, thanks very much, Jerry. I'll open up to questions just in a second, but I think some of the things that you're talking about very interesting there. Looking at it myself, actually, there's a couple of areas that interest me, particularly around about some of your early slides, where you talked about establishing consent, and there was another one that I highlighted there, picking on insecurities and somebody's insecurities. And I think the difficulty on that is one, in these situations, how do you establish consent? Because clearly, once words are spoken, they're out there. They can't be taken back. So establishing consent within a team environment, I think, is interesting. And we don't know what people's insecurities are as well. Often it's a comment that actually will highlight that. And again, that's said before it's that's said before you understand it. You use a sporting analogy, which was Jose Mourinho, and I suppose I'm thinking about the very recent incidents at Yorkshire Cricket Club, where clearly a longer term culture of, we assume what they thought was banter, has now come to the fore. And this was many, many years ago. So I'm thinking about the kind of, almost there's a timeline, yes, of a build up of a situation whereby it then causes particular problems down the line. So I suppose I'm mindful of your thoughts around about anything from the courage to manage conversations. How do you nip those in the bud? You've given examples at the end of your presentation there of nipping things in the bud before they become a particular problem. I just wonder what your thoughts were around about that.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to speak about that. And a comment popped up from the room about simple message: treat others how you'd want to be treated. And I agree, but not everybody agrees with what that is. So my value base might be very different from your value base. The stuff I've grown up with might be very different from the room. And until we collectively say that's not acceptable, and that is the examples that have happened in Yorkshire Cricket Club. So what was seen as okay is not okay. It never was. And what you've described, that timeline, there's a lot of work that was referencing behaviours in the lad mags that were around for a long time. The stuff, there was even a TV station called Dave, and it was the home of witty banter. So it was almost like laddish and okay, particularly in the football sporting environments where this was becoming okay. Highlighted by the downward spiral bit was, I think it was the Sky News, Sky Sports presenters that were sacked because they said stuff that they thought was just witty banter. and actually was really inappropriate. So I suppose the stuff around about permissions and consent, nobody's going to consent to being slagged off for being a certain religion. That's just not acceptable. But if what happens in a room is, unless we have the courage to nip it in the bud, or make it clear that actually I find comments about my appearance or that, I actually hate when that happens. So that's known in the team. We've sat the 5 of us together and said, well, guys, we need to talk about this. I think it's okay, but it really obviously isn't, and that's my fault. I'm really sorry. So it's very difficult to get these conversations started. But when you give something like a slide, like some of these things, it might be useful to start a conversation in a small team. Could somebody sit with a team? So we've got these cards that we use, values cards, that we encourage people to use. That here's an example of teamwork, and what does that look like for us? So that starts these conversations, and it might be that it gives somebody the confidence and the courage to step up and say, guys, I need to talk to you about something because this has been doing my head in for years. And out it comes. Suddenly there's awareness, just like that young cricketer did. He said, well, actually, guys, here's what my life experience was. And suddenly there's this whole, oh my God, how did that happen? But everybody knew it was happening. We're going back to that herding thing. They all knew it was going on. They're all very apologetic now, but at that time, that guy was miserable and nobody dealt with it. And it's a real difficult issue, and let's not beat about with it. Everybody's struggled with it, but we need to tackle it and understand it.
Okay, thanks. I'm just conscious of time, and I'll open it up to the room. People on the webinar, if there's any further questions, if you want to put your hands up. I'm not sure entirely if I can see that, or just ask Jerry any questions.
I think somebody put a comment about the culture of spite in the comments. Social media is a real nightmare for this, and I don't know how organisations are going to cope with it. It really is a real challenge, particularly if people are going to dark spaces where there's no corporate control, and that can be a real challenge.
Okay, does anybody have a question for Jerry? Anybody want to raise any issues or give examples of good practice approaches that have taken place across theirs in their particular organisations? I'm seeing something here from Carol. Is there something around knowing where boundaries are, but also acknowledging that boundaries can change for people? So I suppose that's kind of what's okay today might not necessarily be okay for me tomorrow.
Yeah, I suppose it's the level of understanding of why it's not okay now, because it's never been okay. People have developed strategies to cope with it. Going back to the friend I had who worked in England as the only Scot, he tried to cope with it, and didn't make people aware of how he was feeling, and didn't say why he left. So these people perhaps didn't realise what was going on. So they found it was okay. Unless you make the boundaries clear, I find this really upsetting when people say things to me. Speaking from the eye is often very difficult to encourage people to do. And we don't know what we don't know, so we carry on.
I'm seeing Linda, you've got your hand up. I can see. Do you want to?
Thanks for that. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can do, yeah.
So, thanks for that, Jerry, and it was good to see you. I can't remember even how many years it is since we last saw each other, but it's good to see you. Yeah, I think thank you for that presentation. I think that was really thoughtful. And I think all too often we're in the situations where we, whether we now notice it at the time or probably afterwards, that we are a kind of bystander and watch things going on, or we don't say something for fear. And it's like, it's not just if you're that 17, 18-year-old coming into a new organisation. Sometimes it can be a new person around a senior team, around that board table. And I don't know how many times throughout my career, 30 odd years, where you sit and you're actually gobsmacked about some of the tone and behaviours of some people around the table, how they speak to each other, not knowing really sometimes. I think I'm a bit older and more gobby now, so I do say, but I think now first coming into those areas, I think sometimes it can be quite shocking, and I think sometimes people don't say something because they're so shocked about what they're witnessing round about them, and I guess it's us offering people stepping into new roles or different roles about that, having that little toolkit there about things and how they can tackle things. You don't need to do something in the room, you can have a quiet conversation outside, which is sometimes the best way is that kind of putting the mirror up to them to say it. But yeah, I think it's certainly thought provoking. And now, how many times have we all heard that? Oh, it's just such and such, and they're just like that, and now they're near retiring anyway, so we'll not have that when they go, rather than in the obvious happens and then extended retirement, and they're always round. So I think it's good, and it's probably thought provoking for me that now we do need to stop being that bystander and tackle it, but offer others round about is that permission to say now put that mirror up and say, do you know what you're saying here and how that's making me feel.
And I think often what happens is people say, you know, if you're finding this offensive or difficult, what's your problem? And they start pointing the finger at you. You've got the problem because you're finding it's offensive. And I think, no, that's a good point. And again, going back to the active bystander training, they talk about the 4 Ds, about the things that you should do afterwards. And it might not be safe to do something now. You might want to do something later, but as long as you do something, that's their message. So I would recommend having a look at that, guys, because it's really quite interesting. I see a hand up there, Chris.
Yes, indeed. Do you want to? Moonkind, is it? Moonkind?
Yeah, I've just got a couple of points I want to make in terms of, I think as professionals, we need to start calling it out and tool up people to call out unacceptable behavior, and that build that confidence, so we create that culture. I think it's a slow burn kind of situation. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think it's about also knowing your team, knowing the people you work with, and understanding what makes them click, and that takes time.
Yeah.
But I think we're in a world where we've got an opportunity, since the civility and respect stuff's come out, to really kind of change it up. And like you say, the bottom line is it's going to impact on patient care. If you've got a motivated workforce, a happy workforce, you're going to get good quality care. So let's try and focus in on that as the end product, so to speak, and then try and get ourselves lined up. But I suppose it's kind of, we need to start kind of instilling those values right at the beginning through nurse training, through medical training, through admin staff, through kind of, mentoring programs, whatever works. And it needs to be led from the front. Because the amount of times you've kind of come across senior colleagues kind of saying things that you think afterwards, if you're in a public domain, you wouldn't be saying that. So why are you saying that? So it's about calling it out.
Yep.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
And I think that's an excellent point. Just before you actually said that, my thoughts went to some of the worst behaviours that I've seen in organisations tend to exist at the top, because and it's often by leading by example. Talk about leading by example, but not necessarily doing it. I wonder, just maybe as a final comment, you gave an example there of John Lewis in Edinburgh, kind of summarily dismissing 2 members of staff in the day. I'm not entirely sure what the disciplinary policy was like in there in a private organisation. But Jerry, my thoughts are as well that often now we see the consequences of actions and behaviours are almost instantaneous. I'll go back to Yorkshire Cricket Club. I wouldn't like to count the number of people that have lost their jobs over that within the space of a week and a half. And I wonder how you that last comment about a slow burn and sort of building this and building civility into training and changing the approach fits in with the concept of almost this immediate response, and particularly our discussions around about social media as well. Once it's on there, if it's on there to stay, it can be found, and often at the moment there's not really there's no way back once these behaviours have actually been outed. So how do we kind of even up this need for a longer term approach to civility and changing changing behaviours within the workforce with this kind of culture now of almost instant penalisation in terms of when behaviours like that are outed.
John, this context was because the organisation that permits and promotes behaviours in that way can actually be clobbered financially as well. So there's that risk, but I would probably think about that in the workshop, having my banter, but it's actually somebody hearing it, reporting it, going through that no fee, no win, no fee claim with a legal team is an issue that organisations are conscious of. But the bit about the slow burn, yeah, you're talking organisation development, you're talking about culture change. It will not happen overnight. It's kind of, and that's what my worry about. This seems a training course. Oh yeah, well he's banter training, so that means if he doesn't say the wrong thing, we're going to sack him. That's just not the way this has got to be. This has got to be a culture change and creating awareness. Actually, this is not acceptable in our culture, in our organisation. We don't do that. We wouldn't want to do that. We want to attract and encourage people to come here. So in NHS Lothian, we've got huge drive for modern apprenticeships and bringing young people into the organisation. We're desperately needing people to come in the health and care sector. So we need young, enthusiastic people who are not going to be insulted or bullied or harassed just because they're different. And we need to slowly change the culture in the organisation to reflect that. And leadership is where it sits.
That's great. Thank you very much. Jerry, thanks for taking the time to give us your presentation, which will be posted online on the HPMA national website. I wonder as well, through your presentation, you made reference to a number of different approaches and programmes, YouTube links, whether or not we might be able to discuss that afterwards, and we'll get links to the various programmes that you've talked about attached to your presentation as well on the website, so people can see that.
Okay.
That's okay. So thank you very much, Jerry. Thank you everybody for attending. I know these are short webinar sessions. I hope you